I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. Leaders are paid to do mostly just one thing, and that is to ensure that they get results. When you think about all of the systems and processes and work that they do, it's all to get some sort of result in order to move the company forward, the organization to meet its mission, et cetera, et cetera. But my next guest on the Business of Intuition, a guy named Jim Bishop, actually has a perspective that I think is quite good and quite unique, and I actually agree with, which is that in order for these leaders to be good at getting things done, they have to be in the art of being able to create a space for people to be present, for them to be able to manage their energy, and to be self-reflective. That leaders today are not just good doers, but they're good beers, if that makes sense. Jim Bishop has over 2 decades of immense experience in executive development, corporate leadership, and human performance. And Jim Bishop stands as a beacon, sounds like a pretty highfalutin way of saying it, of transformative leadership through his business. Conjunction leadership is what he calls his business. Jim's journey has taken him across the globe, coaching executives, diverse teams, and orchestrating the modernization of leadership systems for transforming business units, having collaborated with industry giants like Eli Lilly, Roche, and others. Jim recognized the pivotal role of a visionary leader willing to first work on themselves while revitalizing their culture. This catalyzed the birth of Conjunction Leadership in 2020, his current company, where Jim provides executive coaching and team development solutions. As a certified coach by the International Coach Federation and others, Jim's methods are a blend of science and art. He empowers executives through executive coaching, corporate culture consulting, and team effectiveness programs focusing on holistic development and the ability to, again, make leaders be extraordinary at creating the space for others to be creative so that they can get work done. I also want to make a quick announcement before we move into this interview that this particular podcast, which I have had the pleasure of doing now for 4 years, which has always been called The Business of Intuition, inspired by a talk that I gave on a TEDx stage 4 years ago with a similar title, is changing slightly. It's going to be called Lead Ovation starting in June. Or end of May, depending upon when we can launch this. And the reason for this is that we really felt that we were going to focus on things like really being able to reimagine, to facilitate, and to flourish. And the podcast is really going to be focused for those executives and HR professionals and offering them a unique blend of innovative leadership strategies and practical insights, and to dive into the world where imagining traditional approaches, facilitating effective solutions, and flourishing in a dynamic business environment are going to be key. The idea here is that there's some old principles that are now new again because of our ever-changing world. And Lead Ovation is really the way in which we're going to be talking greatly in depth about those particular ideas and concepts and mindsets that maybe have been around for a long time, but now because of our ever-changing world are becoming new, and because we need to begin to consider the context of everything which we do, whether it be leading a team, a culture, or ourselves. So look for more information about this renamed podcast called Lead Ovation. In the meantime, let me introduce a wonderful gentleman by the name of Jim Bishop on the Business of Intuition. Jim, it's great to have you on the show. And I was thinking as we were discussing what you do and I do a few minutes ago, that I'm often asked in coaching about people who usually are maybe in their 40s and they say, I want this new position. I want this new job. I'm the next one up. I'm a high potential. I've got this other career aspiration. And I sometimes, probably like you, are brought in to help these high flyers, if you will, get to their next rung on the ladder, right? And then I'll stand back and I'll ask them the question that often causes them to give me that deer in the headlights look, which is, so why do you want this new job? I mean, what's this all about? I mean, what's the why behind the other promotion? And I'm always flabbergasted by the inability for people to really thoroughly answer that question. It just seems like it's another thing to do that they've been doing since they were probably in high school, is always going for the next ring, if you will. And I'm also finding at the same time that the older these people get, the more they continue to be on the hamster wheel of their career, that they feel more and more unsatisfied with life. And they're a bit depressed, quite frankly. Are you seeing that? And what are you getting from the clients that you are interacting with? And if this is something that we can agree with, that this seems to be a pattern. By the way, those of you who can't see Jim, his eyes just lit up like saucers. So I guess we're on the right path here. How do we help these wonderful souls who have been programmed and worked their flipping butt off to get where they are now, to then reestablish and reevaluate their life at a time when they've got a lot to lose because a lot of people are supporting, and there's a lot on the line here. So what's your take on this, and how do we help these people?
Dean, you've asked about 12 questions within one statement. So there's a good. First of all, let me just say thanks for having me on the show, and I can tell already this is going to be a fun dialogue. So, yes, I see the same thing. Let me start with that. I see it in maybe a different sense as well, that a lot of the clients I work with are already at the top of the pyramid, and they're already they've experienced those things because they have taken all of the series of promotions, sometimes without answering the question of why, right? So you might be seeing it in one regard, I see it in another, but the pattern still exists, that sometimes people don't have a clear yes. So they just keep saying, this seems like the right thing, right? Or maybe they don't have a defined no to know what is the limit. But where does it come from? I don't have all of the answers, but I do see patterns emerge in some of the clients that I work with. And generally the definition of success for a lot of us is the graph and the hockey stick goes up and to the right to some extent, right?
Right.
And if we measure ourselves based upon our salary, and we say that salary is a metric of my own individual worth or my own individual meaning, the hockey stick goes up and to the right, generally with the more promotions I take. So it's maybe a heuristic or a mental shortcut for me to say this is my value. In reality, though, I think there's probably a more psychological pattern that happens, is like, if I haven't ever really thought about what is my existential meaning and the thing that I can do better than most, then what I do is the thing that most people tell me I'm good at. And there are always people around us that are probably saying, here's what you should do. Here's what your next step is. Here's where you're at. And we place ourselves out of the center of our control sometimes and allow other people to be in charge of those decisions. The reason that the depression or the anxiety may show up later on is because people have realized I've lived my life outside of the center of my control. And I've gotten to a place that I've gotten, not because I intentionally set out here. Yes, I did make those decisions, but it was because I did it because I was trying to impress or was trying to express something that wasn't my own desire. And now I've got it. Now I've worked really hard to get it. And I sit where I sit, but maybe what if I don't want what I don't want anymore, right? And people are asking, I see a lot of my clients asking that question, like, what if I got what I don't really want? And can I be incongruent with that based upon everything that I've thought I've always wanted? I wanted more power. I wanted more responsibility. I wanted to sit at the top of the pyramid. I wanted all the accoutrements of success that come along with it. But what I didn't realize was it all came at a cost. And sometimes that cost was the relationships with others, the opportunity to serve, the places and the space in my calendar where I could actually self-identify maybe with other passions or hobbies or ideas. And they've left all of those on the sacrifice of the altar of the thing that they actually got was their career and their time debt. And so what I do in my space is I just help leaders rebalance that equation around and optimize their life again and start realizing you don't have to leave out on the things you already have. It doesn't require that you change everything about your life and sell the house and sell the cars and move to some remote beach. What it really requires is just a lot of internal work to actually identify what is it that you want and how do you go get that all over again and be in the center of your control. So
there's you're making my mind explode here. So let me try to find one of the thoughts that came into consciousness as you were talking. Some of what you described, because you live in Indianapolis, right? You live outside. Right. And I think I told you before we started this conversation that my father grew up in Indianapolis. And now I'm seeing this connection between Indianapolis and the way you described this pathway of leadership. And what I'm beginning to realize is that there may be, we might label this, that for many years ago, for hundreds of years, this was sort of the male definition of leadership. This was what men did. This is what men were trained to do. This is maybe what we are also from a very primal perspective. We're here to do the things that we do, to sacrifice for our family, to do it hopefully for the right reasons. But that's kind of what we've been conditioned to do for, centuries to do. And so I'm thinking about my dad when he was younger, and when I was a little baby and a kid growing up, I noticed the same sort of patterns that you described right now in terms of these people, men and women getting to that point in their life when they're kind of going like, is that all there is? And I've sacrificed a lot for that. So I guess I don't even know what the question is, but are we at a nexus point of redefining leadership that includes the feminine? Is there a feminine way of leading versus a male way of leading, and we should honor both, and we shouldn't all try to be the same? Or are we trying to be the same, and is that the right path? And is the reason why we're stressed out partly is because we're trying to be something that we shouldn't be or that we're not? Again, I'm sorry, Jim, 5 different questions in one statement, but what's your thoughts about this whole male-female leadership pathway that we are now seemingly coming together on? And I don't know if it's working.
Yeah. There is a dynamic there. And I think the pandemic and everything that was associated with 2020 forced us to a reconciliation of what does that mean. What I mean by that was in 2020, early 2020, the pandemic had set in, everybody was working remotely. A lot of relationships were broken. A lot of the water cooler talk that we experienced in our work or the social connections that we had were just naturally eroding as we buckled down, learned how to use Zoom, and interacted in a much, much different way with a lot less connection in that regard. That was one piece of it. Then later in 2020, with all the social unrest and some of the hashtag Me Too movements that were going on, right? Then there was this reconciliation around social justice and righting the wrongs of the past and trying to reconcile how do we bring that into our workplaces of today. All of that, to me, brought on a new, what I would call an employee value proposition. When we weren't connected with other people, one of our most primal needs as human beings is to connect, to feel a sense of meaning and belonging to the people that are around us. What we experienced was our churches, our schools, the places that we most naturally found that meaning and connection in our communities had largely shut down. And sometimes our distrust of those large institutions were also breaking down at the same time. So people weren't naturally finding that meaning and connection, and they looked for it in the workplace. That was the last thing, that was the last institution that was still standing in the middle of all that, where people were saying, do you even know me? Do you know what I do? Do you know me as a person, or do you just know me as the work that I produce? Okay, so with that employee value proposition in mind, and this is what people are looking for, during that period of time, our archetypes, if you will, kind of did show up a little bit. And I do think there is a masculine energy, and I think there's a feminine energy. Can they be expressed by the different genders? Absolutely, it can. But in the masculine archetype, the hunter, the protector, the gatherer, it started to show up. And a lot of men leaders, the ones that I particularly work with, started trying to keep the business open, protect the people, make sure that the rules were followed and that we got product to where it needed to be and the company stayed profitable so that we could keep people employed, right? Mm-hmm. They went into this overprotective kind of mode of making sure the operations and the business ran the way that it should. I also saw some of my female counterparts stepping into those messy conversations with greater ease and fluidity about, Tell me about your experience growing up differently than I did. Tell me about how you're feeling right now. I want to understand the emotional connection that you do or don't have. And when we got on Zoom meetings or where I was working with clients, what I would see is that feminine energy allowed people to come together, even in a remote environment, and say, I still feel like I have meaning and worth. My male counterparts maybe didn't do that quite as easily, and have had to learn that over time of how to help people adapt and connect. But mainly, they've had to help themselves learn that because it's not natural for most men to grow up in an environment where we're emotionally literate. And if we can't recognize our own emotions readily, it's hard for us to recognize them in others. This is a generalization, but most boys are kind of conditioned in some cases that expression of emotion is sometimes a weakness. Like on the ball field or whatever, we're told to rub some dirt on it. We're just told to get over it. We're put on the stiff upper lip. That carries itself through generation after generation, and it showed up large and loud during the pandemic. And I think we're still kind of dealing with that to some extent. In my work, a lot of my work focuses on helping my clients just understand what they are experiencing and that it is neither an either or situation, thus the name conjunction. I'm neither happy nor sad. I can be both of those things. I can find satisfaction and joy at the same time that I'm really frustrated by something else. And if I can put all of those emotional connections in the same place and not neutralize it by saying I'm fine, what happens is I give myself a lot more emotional dexterity to recognize all of the other emotions that are going on around me. And we can connect in our human condition while we get good work done.
So it seems sort of then obvious that we're bringing the best of both. Hopefully, this is the altruistic side of me saying the male and the female coming together. And that at least in my generation, maybe your generation as well, we've seen those two paths, the female and the male, all of a sudden join. Again, as I go back to my childhood, my mother was the nurturer. She was the one that was much more emotionally literate. My father wasn't, but he was the worker. And now all of a sudden we have the workforce that we do. And so would you say that things like asking questions about what's your why, AKA Simon Sinek and emotional intelligence and psychological safety, that these are typically very broad brushstrokes, female tendencies that are being brought into the workforce that weren't there before, and that we're seeing them, we're creating a new soup, if you will, in our leadership characteristics by the advent of female strengths.
Yes and no. I would say feminine strength, right? Feminine energy.
Okay.
Not just due to the gender of a female, but the blessing that has happened. Yeah,
fair enough.
The blessing that has happened over time is I do think we have more representation in our workplaces of diversity, which allows us to have more of that energy naturally expressed. And because of that, we tend to wrap models or frameworks around things that, and even as such, we label them as soft skills, right? Leadership today is even still thought of as a soft skill when it's probably the hardest thing that you can learn. The most difficult part of it is tapping into yourself. And so, yeah, I do think it's probably an expression of the feminine energy that we've learned that we need to embrace. And the psychology and the scientists and even some of the social science behind it is let's put words around it so that words and meaning can be shared. When words or meaning are shared, culture emerges. So
I wonder what your thoughts are on this, Jim. I was talking to one of my clients about this, that I call it the pandemic. I think the pandemic in some ways uncovered things that were already there. It just brought it forth. We were able to see that what was hidden. We had, a booming economy pretty much in 2019. It's hard to see the underbelly when we're supposedly feeling successful, at least on the general sense. Like, of course, a lot of people weren't, but generally speaking, society was sort of saying that. I wonder about this idea that to be the leader, meaning a person who leads, a person who has a vision, a person who certainly will take advantage of all the subject matter experts and getting people on board, but in the end will be the bold one who will take the slings and arrows and will charge forward because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes when I was talking to this other person, we were talking about that's getting harder to do because we've seemed to take the pendulum and moving much more towards making sure that everybody's comfortable, everybody's on board, and everybody agrees from a consensus perspective. And that we've sort of have overcompensated to the point where we can't serve everybody all the time. We can do the best we possibly can, but that friction of including people in the process at the same time of moving forward, getting everybody on board, and yet moving us in the right direction, that tension seems to be very much a part of what I notice in organizations and with leaders, and feeling uncomfortable about where I should fall and how do I bring this all together is makes for a sticky wicket, as they say. What's your sense about all this?
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts that go through my mind in that. Like, let me first take one of the first phrases that you said and maybe pick it apart a little bit. But you said that the pandemic brought out what was already there. And I would agree with that. I also would say that the statement that you made was, we just weren't aware of it, is one that can be made out of you and I coming from more of maybe a privileged background, right? A white male demographic, where what was already there, we just weren't aware of because we hadn't experienced many of those things. We didn't know what it was like in some cases that maybe other people always knew that it was there regardless of what the economy was doing. They just 100%. Didn't have the voice to it, right?
100%. So, yeah. Yes.
So with that said, then I think that what is happening is this reconciliation of it all, where we're getting it all mixed around and people are feeling comfortable saying, I have an opinion. Now, back to your point of how do you make consensus happen? And does everybody have to agree all the time? And is that stalling our leadership capabilities? I don't know that it's stalling our leadership. What it means is we probably need to change the way that we lead a little bit, and maybe some of our definitions, that the hard charging leader just plunges forth and says, you're going to follow me because. I think there is the principle there that if I didn't have the chance to weigh in, I'm probably not going to buy in, right? And so
100%. Yes.
There are still some militaristic archetypes of leadership that many people have. And there are some people who have grown up in the environment of what I would call the Jack Welch era, where we're going to fire our 10% and promote our top 10%.
Yes.
And they have an archetype in the back of their brain that says, I've just got to make the decision come hell or high water. That may not be the case. It may be the decision needs to be made. And my job is to facilitate the ability for the group to make that decision. And sometimes that means we need to do what's best for all of us, even if it's not good for a couple of us or a few of us, right? And the community concern piece is really what we're lacking. I think as a society in general, sometimes it's hard for us to see what is good for all of us because it doesn't feel good to all of us. It doesn't feel like it's best for me, if you will.
Right. And therefore we shouldn't do anything. Right. And exactly. And I think your point's extremely well taken, is that we have to create the environment of trust and the inclusivity of voice into the conversation, that we want those who have to execute to be a part of the design of what they're going to execute. Yep. And there's a great little model that I learned from the chief culture officer over at ASU that is basically, it's a 1 to 5 kind of a decision-making model. And I'll quickly share it because I think it's so useful in terms of being able to help leaders make decisions with their teams when they sometimes are stymied by, I don't have a complete consensus here. What do I do? Do we keep kicking this can down the road to the next meeting, to the next meeting, to the next meeting? And here we are 6 months later, we've done nothing because not everybody agrees. Well, this sort of little model helps in that process. And so what we told me about, which I thought was brilliant, was you say, okay, assuming we all have a large amount of trust, but everybody has a voice, everyone's equal in their perspective. And we've had to maybe build that up over time. Discussion comes, everyone's been able to voice their concerns and what their ideas, and then there's a proposal for something to move forward on, right? And therefore, the decision has been put, should we do this? You go around the room and you say, okay, I want everybody to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 means I absolutely love this idea. This is the best thing since sliced cheese. 2 means I'm pretty good with it. 3 means I got some problems with it, but it's okay. 4 means I have some serious issues with it, but I trust the team enough to know that they're going to make the right decision and I can support it. And 5 means, no, I'm standing in the way of this. We have to continue to talk about it. And so now all of a sudden you've been able to create a grading of where people are, which in itself is really helpful for leaders to understand where the level of agreement is on something. But if you get 4 or under, we're going with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in now. We don't keep talking about it unless, of course, the circumstance changes. And we've been able to use this a few times. And this person I learned this from told me about some of her experiences. And it's really helped leaders be able to rectify this challenge around, on one hand, I got to get everybody to be involved and we got to make sure that we have an inclusive environment. We got to make sure that we have voices. On the other hand, we got to move forward here. You get 16 people in the kitchen and they're all chefs. We can't create a great meal, right? Sometimes we have to say, we're going to put in our 2 cents, but we're going to let somebody, break the tie if we can't all agree, right? So anyway, I just propose that as a tip for you or others that I have found to be really helpful in terms of being able to balance that challenge.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, again, coming back to the psychological principle, when our heads are bombarded with information, the thing that happens is we naturally split it into either or decisions, right? So It's either a yes or no. Do I agree or not? Do we go this way or do we not? What you've just illustrated is the process of being able to slow that decision-making process down enough to add color and variation in between.
Yes.
And that's the problem that I see happening in leadership most, is that the explosion of information, the explosion of digital, the advent of AI, information is so abundant. We are like literally fat on it. I call it infobesity, right? We are obese.
Oh, good word, Jim. Infobesity.
Yeah. When you have that much information in your brain, it can't handle it. It's like you're overloading the computer system. And so it has to start categorizing it, and it splits it into the most either or option, those two extremes. It's what's happening in our political situation right now, right? And when we can slow that decision-making process down, what happens is variations of gray start to emerge between the black and the white.
That is brilliant, man. You just made my afternoon on that. You just articulated it so well. I think it's the same way with trust. I mean, it's just a common word that we use all the time. Hey, Jim, I trust you or I don't trust you.
Yes.
I trust my wife or I don't trust my wife. I trust my boss. I don't trust my boss. That's such a binary either or, 100% zero. I mean, how do you possibly label your relationship in such an extreme?
Yes.
It's not possible. There was another, model, I don't know if I found it somewhere, where you could say, you know what, Jim, I trust the fact that you care about me. I trust the fact that you're competent in what you can do. I trust the fact that you say that you mean what you say, that you're authentic. So that's all good. But there's one area I don't trust you in. This is just an example, that you're going to follow through on what you say you're going to do.
Yes.
So, and now all of a sudden I realize, okay, what's my issue with Jim when it comes to my trust? I trust him in all these other areas, but I don't trust him to follow through what he says he's going to do. So now all of a sudden I'm armed with something that I can go back to Jim and say, Jim, in order for this relationship to get to its next level, I have a request of you to do X, Y, and Z. And if you do that, my trust of you is going to continue to grow. And, so now we have a platform, an ability to ask for what we want. But when we say, I trust you, I don't trust you, there's nothing I can do about it.
I love the world that you're creating. And the one that I want to live in is one where we do that, where we're able to have those kind of tension-filled but productive conversations with one another, right? Where today it's either I like you or I don't. And if I don't talk to you. If I do, I'm going to be overly nice to you most of the time. But somewhere in the middle, we have the opportunity to get along with most people if we're able to have tension-filled, productive conversations.
It's so good because I would think about like style of communication, whether your flavor is Myers-Briggs or True Colors or Hogan or Predictive Index. We have one that's a variation of social agility or social styles. But, the point of all that is, as you said, that we have infobesity.
Infobesity. Yeah.
God, that's so good, man. That's a great phrase. Is that we have to, because of that infobesity, say yes or no to things all the time. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And we never get to the real flavor of what's being presented to us. So if I have a style that comes to you that you don't like, you may never get to the content of what I'm trying to give you. It may be exactly what you need, but because my style is too big or too analytical, you say no without even getting to the gift that I'm about ready to hand you.
Yes.
And we do it all the time with people.
Yeah. It's only getting worse. It's only getting worse. And I feel like most people don't understand how their neural system works and how they're overloading it and how they're giving themselves too much input without enough space. When you do that, it overloads the network. It fries it. And your brain your brain is the reserve. It's the place that budgets your energy, right? And it's going to put all of the cognitive and judgment functions on the back burner because it's thinking it's under a constant threat. If we do that, we burn all the glucose that we could possibly be using to have more of these creative things that are going to move our world forward. And instead, we're getting all of the reactionary things that just keep us surviving. It doesn't help us thrive.
No wonder we're burned out. Our brains are fried. I mean, 20% of our calories get used by our brain, right?
Yeah.
And the brain cannot handle. It's like we have a world that's living at a 10 gigabyte speed with a 286K Pro brain.
Yeah.
We can't process it. It's like we're shoving in a 220 volt into a 110. There's way, way too much. And so then the brain, all it has to do is most of what it does is it says no in order to survive. And maybe it says yes to this thing or that thing, or it gets a little bit of, titillation with this because it feeds our need for stimulation. I've got another buddy of mine who told me another great phrase. He said, we're also in this environment of, he called it fear porn.
Yeah.
And I thought, so then you throw on top of your info, what again?
Infobesity. Yeah.
Infobesity. I almost said infobesiality. That's not what I mean. Infobesity plus the fear that seems to be in the ethers, COVID, post-COVID, pre-COVID, all of that, we just are really kind of shrinking down as a species, of which I don't want to leave this conversation on such a depressing note. So, Jim, how can our leaders, based on your insights, slow down and take stock and recharge and be at the effect of their life or at the intentionality, driving their life forward versus being just a reactor?
Yeah. It's a pregnant question that you ask with many different facets. But the first one is take stock. If you're okay with how things are, you're unlikely to change. But most people in the quiet spaces of their heart are not okay with the way things are, right? We may have learned to survive in it, but we're not okay with the constant bombardment of information or the addiction to our phone or the division that we see in our society, right? And if we're not okay with it, I can't look at the systemic challenge and try to say, how do we change the system without me first trying to change myself? And so that's the piece. If leaders aren't okay with how things are, let's first start from within and let's look at what am I feeling in the present state, right? If we don't know our feeling, back to the emotions, then they're going to regulate us. And if I'm in constant threat detection because the information is bombarding me and I feel like I can't keep up or I'm going to lose out, or even a lot of the information we're consuming is designed to invoke some sort of outrage or fear in us. When that happens and I'm not able to articulate that, then this undercurrent of emotion that goes through my neural system is going to start regulating my behavior. And I will start saying no. I will start putting up defenses. I will stop trusting people as much. I will start telling them what to do instead of asking where they want to go more. And when we have all of that reactivity in the system, reactivity meets more reactivity, and we just get non-productive drama happening between individuals, right? So we have to first calm ourselves down so that we project a more calm presence for other people. And when they come to us, what's going to happen is we will be able to help them regulate downward and regulate the space and give them time and attention. When that happens, they're going to create the space for themselves that they're going to realize I'm not okay with how things are. And if a leader goes first in that journey, many other people will follow. If a leader doesn't go first in that journey and they have leadership by position and they're creating a lot of reactivity amongst themselves, they will create reactivity downstream, and it's just going to magnify over and over and over again. Right. And so I'm a huge proponent. Like, I tried for years to put people in classrooms and train them and help them understand this, but it didn't work because they would go back to a leader who didn't understand it. But in my model today, I start with a leader and we help them figure out how to lead with more grace and ease so that they can have a lot more pleasant interactions with people. But what they're really doing is regulating the environment, the vibe that goes on amongst people so that we can be in the creative space together. And that's truly, to me, that's the only way that some of our societal issues are going to get solved, is when we have leaders who don't get burned out at work and still have energy to go home and serve.
As trite as Dr. Philish as it may sound, it's really about being a beer versus a doer, really creating that energy, that space. It reminds me of the work of Eckhart Tolle, the power of now. It reminds me of the constant awareness that I have with leaders is that they don't have even 20% of understanding of their energy's effect on other people.
Absolutely. And
I get blown away all the time. People come back to me and go, yeah, you said something 2 years ago and it made a difference. I went, I had no idea. I just know that what our energy and our ability to be present and ability to create that creative space to where you described it, Jim, is probably one of the most important things that a leader can do.
Yes.
And then from that environment, you can start talking about what we're going to do. But until you have that fertile backyard, how are you going to plant anything? And that space is that fertile backyard. This is great. This has been a great discussion. I never know where these are going to go. I go like, all right, who is this Jim guy? And then all of a sudden we have this great discussion. Tell people how they can connect to you and follow your work.
Yeah. Conjunctionleadership.com is the website. It's going to have the most, overview about what we do and some downloadables there. If you want the most current stuff and kind of my inside thoughts, I usually put that out on LinkedIn. So daily posts out there, occasional blog posts, and occasional messages that are, hypothesis about things I'm trying to test out, or theories that I had, or just insights that I've gained after working with many clients in this space. But, I think that the biggest message I leave behind on all of that is we've got to stop trying to react to the world around us, and we've got to get ahead of the problems, because when we're reacting, all we're doing is getting more of the same. But when we're creating, we're actually moving things forward in a way that is challenging, but in a direction that we can't tolerate what's happening anymore. So we need leaders who are courageous and brave and who can create the environment for other people to follow.
I'll say one last thing, was that it makes me think that the external drama that we see in the world is really a reflection of our own collective internal drama. And that if we're going to change the external, we got to get our internal figured out first.
Yes. I love that. I tell clients all the time when they're like, I think I need a new job. I think I need a new boss. I think I need to sell my house and move to Tahiti, whatever it is. I'm like, let's stop trying to change the external until we figure out what's going on the internal, because you'll just find yourself in the same situation all over again, even if you change whatever without changing the inside. So
very good. Well, I hope people call you up. You're good.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean, for having me. This was a fun and uplifting conversation.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.